Here I'm talking about the field of HR. And then given its strategic significance in today's world, why HR consulting becomes so important. So that was my whole idea of bringing this topic to this audience here. I'm not sure how many of you, are from the PGP HR course, or how many of you graduate from that, or how many of you have interest in that. But the idea is not to give an HR spiel, but to just bring into fact that HR consulting, the way I have seen it over the last 16 years, has made a lot of sense. And I wanted to share that perspective in a very candid fashion, today. So, I will just share a few slides, and I said I'm not going to make it boring or monotonous. It's just to sort of, make, help me talk about a few things. I'm just going to quickly check if the slides are visible.
Yes.
So, when I joined HR consulting in 2005, I think the relevance of HR was being questioned. I remember it very, very, very clearly that I faced a lot of resistance, not only by my own self, but by peers, colleagues, friends who said that why would I leave the fancy world of corporate and investment banking in a global bank like HSBC to move to HR consulting? People didn't understand this. All I knew was that I wasn't very happy with what I was doing. Maybe because I was a marketing guy and I landed up in banking, which was a joke for my entire campus, still is. Or it was just the whole idea of trying something new, which I thought would test my limits and get me out of my comfort zone. So when I joined HR consulting, HR itself was not very, very looked at with a lot of respect. It was supposed to be a place where people who didn't have anything else to do it landed up, or who talked a lot landed up here, or HR was supposed to be seen a transactional place where people just did hiring, firing, recruitment, and so on and so forth, so-called support function. And as a result, when you join HR consulting, unlike a strategy consulting, which sounded much fancier and where you were solving real problems and complex problems which required finance and data, here you were talking about softer, intangible issues, which honestly people thought really don't make a lot of sense, right? So that was my induction into the world of HR consulting. And, this slide basically depicts what HR, well, it is still thought of like that in many places, but was clearly thought of those many years back, not the most strategic of places for a IIM MBA to join. And that is the kind of challenge I faced to, change that narrative that why did I join here. It took me almost a year to accept the fact that I had joined an HR consulting firm. I hadn't joined a very fancy strategy consulting firm, and possibly 18 months for me to settle down into what I thought that I was doing was fairly meaningful. The joke is that, if I have to explain to any senior member of my family, right, what do I do? It's not easy. I'm not selling soaps. I'm not selling cars. I'm not lending money. I'm doing something which is slightly more intangible, right? And hence, sometimes the value of such intangible stuff also becomes questionable and, makes you wonder whether you're doing the right thing or not. But, let's talk about what HR has seen as a challenge over the last few years, right? I think the biggest challenge that HR continues to see, and now it is becoming a little better, is its whole infamous and well spoken about struggle to get a seat at the table. It has never been seen strategic, right? Because seat at the table is for the CXOs or the CEO or people who bring in the revenue of the business, or the finance function who are able to control the cost. But HR as an enabler or a support function has never been able to earn a seat at the table. And I think the challenge that has laid in HR is its ability to get to this or convince the others on the table that HR needs to be there, right? And that's again the whole aspect of being relevant, which has changed quite a bit. Now, the fact is, if you look at some numbers and statistics and research, I think the need for HR has never been stronger. Not because India is the most popular, second most populous country in the world, and you're grappling with human talent everywhere, right, from IR to HR, right? But clearly, you can look at any model, right, by anybody, and I think I probably look at the models that HBR has brought onto the table extremely well, right? But the whole aspect of linking business result and strategy to the whole aspect of people strategy is fairly simple, right? The whole cascade down of a business requirement or result into business capability which then comes down to people requirements and employee priority, which is as important, and then the whole aspect of people strategy, right? And then very simply put, the key HR outcomes becoming talent supply, the growth in capability and learning, and of course, how do you drive and measure productivity and high performance, right? Now, even if you look at some recent research, be it around M&A or private equity or startups, right? The importance of HR and why things fail because of lack of HR is not really a surprise, right? I think in the world of private equity, which a lot of us look at with a lot of respect, there has been a lot of talk about the fact that human capital mistakes have led to billions of dollars being lost in value because they were the wrong people in the wrong places running those businesses, right? Uh, McKinsey, Forbes, HPR estimate that many portfolio companies have failed to deliver the returns simply because while the company model was great, but it was the wrong people running those companies. This has become even stronger if you look at times of crisis. So if you look at 2009 or 2020, when the two most recent economic crises have hit, it was all about leadership and people being at the helm, and companies which were able to turn around faster and come back with resurgence clearly had a lot to do with the human capital which was taking those companies ahead rather than a poor lack of vision and leadership, even though the business model was extremely sound, right? I think a lot of research has come into place to say that the value is being defined for many new companies, be it startups or companies going through transformation, by seemingly intangible factors like the company leadership, talent development, and the effectiveness of org. Now, what do you mean by this? I think basically how effectively are you able to break down the business strategies into how people can actually enable or deliver it. The strategies may sound very good, but unless you are able to implement it by the right communication and the right capability, right under the CEO, companies fail disastrously. So today, a lot of the leadership issues that companies talk about, are the ones which are making some companies fail in times of crisis, and some companies go to the next level. There are huge talent gaps, and this is not only being, sort of enhanced by the whole Great Resignation, where people are leaving and there is work to be done, but there is nobody to hire. Always there's been a huge demand supply mismatch. The reason why salaries have been rising in India is not because people are not getting paid well enough. The salaries have risen so fast in the last 10 years that the salaries are becoming comparable to the Western world, but simply because we just are not able to find the talent to fill those gaps, which is why every year on campuses, it's the same pool of talent demand which keeps going around, even though more and more institutions are coming up to giving that education. Decision making, ineffective management teams, all of this has been shown by a lot of research that these are the roadblocks to uh, high profile growth and returns, even though the business models are very well sufficient. What it entirely means is that companies end up doing a fantastic job on the business strategy and deciding which markets, geographies, products to operate in, but they fail to realize that the folks who are going to get them over the line are the folks on the ground. uh, they need to have the capability and the understanding to deliver those goals, and the people on top need to have the ability to build the right culture and lead the right teams. I think enough research has been done. There are enough books on leadership and coaching which tells you that great business performers cannot be great leaders. uh, you know, since I'm a big cricket fan, I always go back to this whole example of Sachin Tendulkar, who was a great cricketer, but who could never be the best captain. Right? The aspects which differentiate leaders from great business people and performers is very different, and companies are realizing that, but it's still nascent in many places, and which is why the value of what HR and HR capability brings to the table is still under question in many places, and is perhaps changing, but not at the right pace. Even if you look at high profile M&A deals, I mean, all of us love investment banking, right? I mean, uh, right from the time I graduated, I'm sure even at the time now, investment banking is the most sought after job, right? In addition to FMCGs and strategy consulting. even if you look at M&As, and I have worked on a fair amount of M&As myself, largely in the financial services space, right? So this research is pretty much, on the ground and something that I have worked with, not only picking up numbers or reports from the internet, but the fact is that people issues are one of the biggest reasons why M&A deals fail. It could be around culture. Culture is a huge issue, huge issue in India and abroad. When two companies come together, their cultural differences and the cultural non-synergies are a huge reason why the merger doesn't go through. Second aspect is the whole aspect of communication to the people, right? Understanding what the people want, how are you taking them through the strategy, right? And insufficient capability or leadership buy-in are some of the reasons why some of the very large marquee M&A deals have failed. If you go back and look back at some of the biggest deals in the history of even corporate India, the feedback that comes is that many of these took much longer than expected or did not deliver the same returns because the whole aspect of people got missed out, right? So again, there is no question on uh, you know, uh, why people issues are so important. Clearly, they link up to not only companies starting up, but when companies come together, there is a huge reinforcement of why deals are failing. Right now, if you look at HR's evolution, as I said in the beginning, I think it has gone through a transition. Is it complete? No. For HR to get a seat on the table, I think the final frontier of being a business driver is still nascent and is coming to light in a few parts, right? Initially, and from what when we graduated, it was always seen as a business supporter, a shared service, a support function, where it would do stuff like payroll, onboarding, vendor coordination, employee grievances, hiring people, so on and so forth. It started becoming a business partner in the early 2000s, in the last decade, where implementation of the policy, which was top down, acquiring talent and retaining talent, and looking at implementation of all the key programs became a huge part. It has started coming in parts to being a driver of the business, right? Understanding and being able to translate the business strategy into talent strategy, knowing what will work for the business, what will be able to drive the culture of productivity and overall high performance is something now which is coming into play. And I know it's a cliche term, but I think and more CEOs are wanting a lot from their HR and they want them to be trusted advisors, right? Now, the question is that has the importance of HR not been there in the past? It has been. I think the problem has been embracing this importance, and secondly, the quality of HR which has been coming into the system. We have always seen HR to be a roadblock, bureaucracy, red tapeism, adding layers, and people who are just there to add some support, not seen as people who would add some intelligent advice to how businesses run. That is the paradigm shift that needs to happen. Is it happening? In parts, yes, but still a long way to go. And that is, I believe, where HR consulting comes to play a large role, because the whole amalgamation of strategy and a very unbiased view of looking at people and being able to become the trusted advisor to business is where the gap of being HR as a support function and HR being a trusted advisor starts to now being played in. If you look at the changing HR paradigm, right, the HR landscape today is far more strategic than what it was earlier. Right from looking at, hiring people, now it's and looking at exit interviews. I think the broad spectrum of what HR does is today changing quite a bit, and this whole paradigm changes when you're looking at transformation of companies who are already mature to companies which are very nascent or starting up to what they want to become, right? It starts from looking at not only hiring, but deciding who to hire, so assessing people and being able to find strategic fits to business, bringing in a very strong culture and employee value proposition, because that is what is going to retain people, not necessarily money. But money is always going to be important. Everybody will always be underpaid and everybody will always get more money outside. So rewards management, though tactical, ends up being a very strong part, because it is not only about managing your payroll or your fixed cost or your bonus, but also to understand what sort of levers of total rewards can be employed to bring in the whole journey of value proposition to an employee. How do you take care of your hypos? How do you take care of your critical talent? Is something which is which is non-negotiable and continues to be on the table, as does the whole aspect of managing your productivity and high performance. Now, one element which has got added here, and I'll talk about it towards the end, is the whole aspect of HR technology. Now, if your customer experience is becoming digital and linked to technology, even your employee experience has to have the same flavor of embracing technology, and which is where customer experience is now getting equated to employee experience, and HR tech or HR technology, both design and implementation, is becoming a huge lever of transforming the way today HR looks. Now, coming to what the HR consulting industry is like today, it's very different from when I joined the firm. When I joined the firm, it was not growing as much. It was nascent, but it was a very young market. That's a typo. The industry is growing by easily by 15 to 20% per annum today. There's a huge demand, and the traditional firms like Aon, Mercer, Willis Towers Watson, Hay continue to be there in the forefront of doing classical HR. I think there's been a huge expansion in the consulting domains of the Big Four. EY, Deloitte, PwC, KPMG, as we speak, have a very large HR setup, which is a very strong extension to their audit, finance, and business consulting practices, because a lot of this in the past was being left for the other four, and they realized that this ends up being the whole pie. What business strategy can deliver can be supported by what the HR strategy team can deliver. So you are seeing today a lot of hiring and a lot of expansion, both in the aspect of rewards, talent, advisory, or consulting in the Big Four. The strategy firms have been at it for the longest time, be it McKinsey, BCG, and Accenture, right? There's been a very large focus on looking at large deals which encompass business strategy and HR strategy. So the universe now, which was the very old traditional firms, is now encompassing the Big Four and the strategy firms. Add to the mix the product firms, which do assessments, which do hiring. So if you look at Jombay or Metal or SHL or DDI, specialized product firms, they are in the mix as well. Now, what has changed, and why is HR consulting also now not only able to help industry look at the needs which were already existing, but also becoming aspirational? Now, both sides have changed. The supply of HR has changed. I spoke about the fact that HR courses were largely the domain of the TICS, as XLRI and HM, HRD. At my time, the IIMs were not really known for HR courses, far and few in between. Now, not only are there many more IIMs, but many IIMs have HR courses, including IIM Indore and IIM Ranchi, right? MD has started a course 10, 12 years back. JBIM has started a course 2 years back. So more and more stellar business schools are now bringing in HR in this domain, because they realize that the need that the industry needs to fuel is great. The demand for HR, which is again from these kind of campuses only, is moving. There is enough hiring happening from the IIMs and non-HR campuses. At the same time, there is a lot of movement of people moving from business roles to HR consulting roles, from line HR to HR consulting, and even from strat consulting into HR consulting. And then finally, there is a proof of the pudding. Not only is HR trying to get and getting a seat on the table, but even more. I think everybody knows about the recent move of Leena Nair from being the CHRO of Unilever to the CEO, right? But this happened much earlier when Dr. Santut Mishra moved from a HR role to a CEO role for the Aditya Birla Group, right? If you look at some best-in-class companies like Bajaj Finance, ICICI Bank, HDFC Bank, HDFC Life, many CXOs or business heads have moved from business to HR, right? Because the realization is that if not only does HR need a very strong understanding of business, but many companies are now saying that unless you have a stint in HR, you can't become a CEO. So best-in-class companies who are actually leadership factories are now having planned career movements of getting people to move from HR across, from business to HR, in case they want to have a longer-term shot at the role of a CEO. So clearly, the way we see HR consulting has changed, not only because the industry is growing and everybody's getting into it, but the whole respect for and the value for what HR brought to the table and what HR consulting can bring to the table is also undergoing a huge shift. And which is where there's a huge, big boom happening in this industry where most of these firms are adding at least 40 to 50 people per year in their teams to lend capacity to the demand for HR talent. As companies start up, as you have unicorns, as you have companies starting operations, there is HR need. HR transformation of business requires HR need. The great resignation or the retention of people requires a focus on HR, right? So everything that is happening around us, and which is where even if you look at today how the pandemic has changed business priorities, there is a big focus on how people need to fill this gap. So one aspect is the demand for people. Second aspect is that people are moving because of the great resignation, because of the whole aspect of digital skill sets, so on and so forth. Now, because you have to work remotely, how do you measure your productivity and overall how do you train your managers to be able to manage this workforce? How do you move to a hybrid model? How do you measure or monitor a hybrid model? How do you bring in aspect of collaboration, values and culture in a hybrid model? The whole aspect of not only physical but mental well-being and engagement of people when they are working remotely, right? Now the hybrid model is here to stay. The pandemic ends, or hopefully it will, but this model won't go anywhere. Many companies will embrace it lesser, some will embrace it more. But the fact is, it's going to be a reality of life, and there is going to be a huge focus on how people are able to adjust to this, which is where again the focus on HR and HR consulting comes back into play because the business priorities are changing hugely, right? So finally, what are clients pushing for now, and why are HR consultants in demand today? Why is our business growing so much? Why is their hiring growing so much? Why are salaries going up so much? Is simply because new age, out of the box solutions is what companies want today, right? There is one area which is talking about digital readiness. I spoke about the whole aspect of employee experience, right? But HR tech, HR, revamp of the process and the future of work, which is how will you work in the next 10 years, is all leading towards how digital ready you are. And that's one big area of work that is coming to HR consultants today. Attention is always going to be a challenge in markets like India and China, right? Uh, can you just keep paying them more? No, you can't. So a better reward strategy, a retention plan, an EVP, right? And looking at how do you make HR more effective is always going to be in vogue. And then finally, we are seeing about the whole aspect of hot skills. Big data, data scientists, tech folks, people who can manage digital skill sets really well. Analytics are, in demand. So the whole aspect of hot skills and how do you manage for the career architecture? How do you build in competencies of doing work in those hot skills is going to be a big area. As will the fact and the old age question that should you be buying tech talent or digital talent all the time, or should you be building it, right? Because the war for talent is always going to be pretty hot, and sometimes it becomes impossible to win that war by throwing money, which many companies are doing, right? But longer term, there has to be a better solution to it, and that is where the whole aspect of building internal competency comes in. And the final fact that in times of crisis and in times of chaos, the one thing that sets apart some companies from the others is the quality of leadership. And I think more and more, sort of companies are getting to that domain. Not only the one that I spoke about, but even the search firm like Egon's and Spencer Stewart have a huge focus now towards how do you build a leadership pipeline? How do you bring in the resilience question for leaders to be able to see businesses through crisis, which is now the new paradigm shift where companies are looking to go to. That's exactly 30 minutes. So I thought I'll time myself to ensure that there is enough time for Q&A. And so, that is where I will just sort of stop sharing the slides, and, I will be happy to answer any questions or observations or any other feedback.
I have a question. May I ask?
Yes, please.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Thank you for the wonderful insights. It was really informative. So one thing I would like to know about the career architecture, because in my current organization, the same thing is going to be happen from this current week itself. They are going for a pilot, right? But I would like to know more on the career architecture side.
So I think it obviously is a much more detailed discussion. It's a proper solution that companies provide to. Firms that provide to companies. But I think the gist of career architecture is that careers are not going to be linear anymore, right? There was a time when careers only meant upward promotion or progression, right? I think what is happening in the world of career architecture is that a lot of new age tech companies are moving towards a far more flatter way of people moving across, not necessarily having the same layers of moving because they people today have lesser time to move, right? So the layers are moving up across when you move across. Second is the careers are becoming more diagonal than vertical, which means that you can move from one function to the other as long as you have the requisite skill sets, right? So you can make a jump. The third is that uh, you know more and more companies want diversity of experience. So 15 years back, if you had to, if you're in operations for a company, you would only be in operations. There is a very healthy encouragement today for operations to move to sales, to move to finance, to move to somewhere else. Of course, there'll be some roles which will be specialist. For example, legal, right? For example, actuarial. But many other functions, be it across sales and operations or business development, right? Or if you look at a bank between credit and corporate banking or analytics or sales, are getting mixed up. So what we saw earlier as vertical paths to careers are now becoming, very crisscross, very tangential. The whole aspect of career architecture is now undergoing a change. It is being driven by not only the skill sets, but the kind of disruption you want to have in the firm to be able to enable creative thinking. Now, many companies, many industries will not be able to do it because they're bound by risk and regulation. But many others, especially the new age companies, are experimenting with tangential career architectures to be able to bring in a very diverse point of view as compared to what we have seen the last 20 years.
Okay, thank you.
Paridhi has a question.
Yes, sir. So I would like to ask, as a PGP student and not a PGP HR student, what does working at a human capital consulting firm like Aon look like?
So I think the first thing is that I think HR consulting doesn't really um, have a bias or a non-bias towards folks who come from HR. I think there is an expectation that yes, if you have studied HR, then some of the areas that you end up working in become simpler. But I think as long as you have the right attitude and the right skill sets, I think there is a healthy demand for folks coming in from any course. But to your question, I think, and this is not only for Aon, but I would perhaps say that for any HR consulting firm or any consulting firm, I think the pattern is pretty similar. You're right. When you start with a lot of delivery and project work, right? And then eventually you start getting in front of clients and managing relationships, and then you end up having business development. But I think at least I can talk about the more traditional firms like Aon, Mercer, Taz Watson, not so much about the big four because they are a very different model because there a lot of the drive comes from the audit finance and the strategy consulting teams. In the core HR consulting firms, I think you can expect three broad work streams or three broad areas that you can progress on. You obviously do a lot of project delivery and then you start doing a bit of sales and client management as well. But eventually you can be a business manager, managing a business or a solution. You can be, or if you really like only working on projects, then you can be a project manager and work across large projects going forward, where you end up becoming an expert on delivery. The third is you can move into a solution role. So let's say HR and some aspects of HR consulting really, really interesting. It could be long-term incentives. It could be how to manage manpower productivity or future of work. You could become a solution expert, right? Or the fourth one, simply could be that you just want to be as part of a commercial function, looking at the key account management or sales. So it's like any other part. You have sales and you have project delivery. But if you were to join HR consulting firm, you can expect a fair amount of project work, and in maybe in a couple of years' time, client management. In 3-4 years' time, managing people and managing targets and sales. And then after 5 years, you decide which career track in consulting you want to get to amongst these four that I spoke about.
Yeah, thank you, sir. That was very helpful.
Tushar?
Yeah, thank you, Rupang, for the session. My question is, a continuation of what Paridhi asked. I'm more curious about how the intangibles, you mentioned that, there are more intangibles in HR than otherwise would be. So, with respect to the first two rows that you mentioned, actually solving the problem, the delivery part, how does it happen? I mean, is there data, a lot of data involved? And how do you take care of the intangible part? Because if you're asked to solve the culture of a firm, how do you go about it? So a bit more about your experience, how you worked on.
That's a good question. So if you look at the domain of HR consulting, there is obviously stuff which is more number-led and financial. For example, if you look at uh, you know compensation or rewards management, right? It's more about benchmarking salaries or creating some nice fancy models of incentive plans, stock options, valuations, which can show you how competitive your particular employees vis-a-vis the market. So it's fairly number driven, right? When it comes to things like managing productivity or managing your overall KPIs performance, those are measurable as well. Now things like culture, employee value proposition are more longer term, and they require a fair amount of listening to the company, understanding the strategy, where they're really coming from, talking to employees, what are they looking for. So it's a lot of fact finding, a lot of diagnosis, understanding what is not working well in the organization, and bringing in some benchmarks or best practices. Right now, the problem with these kind of projects ends up being they're longer term, and the success of these projects is usually seen in the longer term. Right. For example, if you're trying to solve for attrition, you will know whether in a year whether attrition has been solved by by paying people well enough or not. Or if you are hiring people and if you are doing assessments to hire people, again, it's very measurable, because if those people fit well into your organization, in the next 1 year, you know whether you've done a good job or not, right? So some of this is it sounds intangible, but can be measured. A lot of the work that is done is also backed by data, right? Number crunching, collecting payrolls, looking at attrition data, looking at KPIs, looking at retention data, and so on and so forth, right? But when it comes to areas like leadership development or culture, these are much longer term. Now, let's say you have identified certain people you want to groom to be leaders, and you are doing assessments for them, and then you put in a plan for 18 months. It's only after 2-3 years can you actually see whether the leader has been able to accept and improve on those gaps when you do another assessment or see whether he's ready or not, right? It takes time. When it comes to culture is a very soft thing. It's a much longer term, right? Some of these things end up being a 2-3 year exercise or a project, right? And you sort of link it back to the retention, the overall business priorities, right? Employee engagement scores, which is again factual. So there are certain metrics which are able to measure how effective the intervention was, but over a period of time. And that is where the challenge of, having a very strong successor to these projects becomes a question mark. So many times these projects run at least 2-3 years, because it takes that much time for the company in question to measure how successful this particular intervention has been.
Thank you, Rupang.
Paresh, you have a question?
Yes, sir. Thank you. So my question is basically probably not related to the session, but just as a curious, because you being in a consultancy since long time, and I would like to know your views. So basically, what I have seen in my two organization, so usually whenever new CEO comes in, he usually goes for the restructuring. So I don't know how that do the impact on the organization. And moreover to that, whenever the people shuffles from one department to another department as being the part of the restructuring, but later on within 1.5 months, people again come back to their original departments. So really don't know how the impactful the restructuring option is.
So I think one thing that when new CEOs come and there is restructuring happening, obviously it gives companies like us a lot of business, so we can expect some work. So obviously that's good news. But on a serious note, see, I would probably say that not every CEO, when he comes into a company, will do restructuring. I think more mature companies who have very strong leadership practices, or even when the CEO has come through a strong succession pool and is aligned to the vision of the company, I haven't seen restructuring. But yes, in promoter-led companies, or when a CEO comes in to sort of bring in a new wave of transformation or wants to question what the previous incumbent has done, yes, there is rampant restructuring and people are reshuffled and things are changed, and there is you sort of start to question what was done in the past. That happens quite a bit. Now, there is no right or wrong answer, but I think sometimes when you're doing the restructuring, I think the best way to start with, and most good consulting firms would ask that question: why? Is it because you just feel like doing it, or because you note that there is a huge change of strategy required at the end? If you are acquiring a company, or if you are changing a strategy, yes, there is change in HR strategy and strategy required. Just because a new person has come who doesn't believe in what was done in the past, restructuring doesn't make sense. Or many times, it's the CHRO capability. If a CHRO has a very poor, reputation or ability to stand up for what has been done, again, restructuring happens and it becomes more like a CEO's new hobby to shift around things. So, but it has to start from a diagnostic and a clear need to figure out why is it happening. In some cases, it's justified. In some cases, it is not. And I've seen it not happen in many mature companies where the CEO has come in through a proper process with full alignment to what the previous CEO was thinking. That's one. Two, to your point, in my experience, I have seen the other way around. There is always a very good plan to move people. That, I have worked 3 years in sales. Now I should move across into product management or product development. I have worked 5 years in credit. Now I should move into corporate development, right? That's the right way to do things to move a career path. The problem actually happens, people don't let go of their, right? Managers, end of the day, obviously believe in the ethos of the firm, but end of the day, it's your own targets and numbers which count. There is a huge reluctance on the part of managers to let their top people go to other departments. And there is a huge way to pull them back. Now, if you are seeing people come back, it's possibly because, that the original manager eventually made that person come back. It was more like lip service to show, this person has gone and now wants to come back because the department is so good, right? That's a huge challenge that we face in making career paths move, because inherently managers are very insecure about letting their people go. And what eventually happens is, and those people don't move up and they eventually leave the firm. So some managers start realize that, okay, if I don't let go of this person to the other department for his own betterment, he will eventually leave the company. That big high level thinking that eventually it's the same firm, at least he's going to stay in the firm, starts to come in some cases. But the challenge that we see is that people don't let go of their top talent to other departments.
Okay. Because the impact I really couldn't understand in my both the organization. That's why I asked this question. Thank you very much for your insights.
Gaurav, I think this will be the last question we will take. Gaurav Kulkarni.
Thank you, sir. So my question is, I'm currently an IPM student, and based on my interactions with my peers, my batchmates, and also some seniors, like even the ones around me, like my uncle, my father, I think that there has been a great clarity of thought in the fresh MBAs of today as to what organization do they want to join, and what should be the nature of their work, and so on. So does this clarity of thought produce any significant contributions from the present generation in terms of their workplace?
So let me try and understand your question. You're saying that the youth of today have more clarity in what they want as compared to when people like Abhishek and I were youths had. So there is more clarity in terms of what people are looking for, and hence that augurs well for the industry in general. Is that what you're asking?
Yes, sir. The industry and the company they work for, and also for the candidates, that is the students.
See, okay, I have a divergent answer to that, right? I think that on campuses, people may want an A company, but still end up getting a B company. At least that used to happen when we were there. I'm guessing it still happens, right? You don't necessarily want A and go for A? Yes. As maturity has progressed and there is so much more information available around companies, right? You know what you want and you don't want. Let's say 20 years back, broadly we knew I want to do marketing and not finance. But in marketing, where do I want to go? You were okay with the top 5-10. You guys, I mean, people today can be very specific that I want to do marketing of e-commerce, so I'll go to Flipkart or Amazon. Yes, because there is far more options available to you. Those companies come to campus, you do projects for them, you have an internship with them. There's Glassdoor, which tells you about how good or bad the people practices are. So there is much more information for you to make that decision, which is good, which augurs well, because not only do you know where you want to go, you also know where you don't want to go. But I think the counter logic is, why is today, what is happening in the great resignation in India? In the US, it's more about wanting to slow down, not wanting to work, taking time off. In India, great resignation is also because there are too many offers. All of us are in 2021, everybody's gone berserk. Everybody you speak to, you're trying to hire laterally, has 4 or 5 offers. In the tech sector, in the startup sector, people have always so many options. So the flip side to that point is that you may know where you want to go and not want to go, but are you able to make up your mind? Because today the challenge that I am facing, and a lot of people who are hiring people are facing, is that the person is flirting. He has 4 or 5 offers, and on the very last day, he will get better offer and not join me. And being spoiled for choice is creating a big issue in the people who are graduating today. So the clarity is there, but my worry is that the plethora of choice is also bringing in some bit of ambiguity and confusion in terms of where you want to land up. So I think it's a double-edged sword.
Thank you, sir.